Hi, I'm Brian Welk here in the Wrap's virtual studios at the Sundance Film Festival for 2021. And I am joined by the team behind Coming Home in the Dark. I have director and writer James Ashcroft and star Daniel Gillies. Thank you both so much for joining me today.
Thank you for having us.
Great to be here.
So James, let's start with you. I mean, this movie is phenomenal, and you've had a background in theater, and I know you've done a lot of shorts. But what led you to write this story and take this on as your first feature?
Well, it's adapted from the short story by a New Zealand author called Owen Marshall, and it's quite a profound short story, and he was good enough to grant us the rights to adapt it, and it sat in a drawer for a number of years until co-writer Eli Kent and I found a way to get underneath it to make it speak to some of the issues that we were interested in exploring and make it ready for a contemporary audience. And it's an actor's piece as well. It's got 4 compelling characters, and coming from a theatre background and having been an actor myself, I was wanting to work with actors in a genre piece as my first feature. So this was a great fit.
Okay. And Daniel, I mean, your character Mandrake is like super chilling in this movie. You're really good. How did you pair up with James, and what drew you to this story?
Well, I met with James. James, did we meet in 2018 or 19?
Yeah, 18.
2018, and I had a look at a couple of his short films, and I just thought he was a stunning filmmaker already, and then I think I saw the shorts first, and then I read the script, I believe. I can't remember the order in which I read, but then I read the script, and I've said this a couple of times in interviews today, but I actually kind of screamed at the pages, like I actually yelled at it because of to put it this way, the movie is very unpredictable. It's exquisitely unpredictable, and I remember Rachel, my ex-wife, running into the room at the time and saying to me, "Whatever you do, just don't do this film." And I knew kind of immediately that I had to do it, like if I had the opportunity to do it, and I was going to, and then luckily I met with James, and I'm not exactly obvious casting for this role, actually. I don't think. I mean, I think in retrospect, people can always say, well, no, you're obvious for something like this, but I don't think I was. And I think I'm very grateful to James because he rolled the dice on me,
I mean, yeah, your character, he's actually very quiet, and he can just control a room and just the mood very simply, and it's just really terrifying. Like, how did you strike that note? How did you kind of manage that tone?
Well, there was moments when I wasn't managing that tone, wasn't there, James? It was a bit of an exploration with James and trying to find that thing. And also too, I'm only, a character like that's only as good as his captives, is only as good as his victims. And really, we need to pay tribute a little bit to Miriam McDowell and Eric Thompson, who are just stunning in the film as the victims. And really, I was only able to go into those places once they achieved a certain sort of frequency of their hysteria, So in a way, I had an easier role, I think, than they did, because they had to maintain a certain level of horror. Mm-hmm. But I'm grateful to your compliment, though.
James, I mean, what were some of the direction, were in terms of shaping the character, and what were you envisioning when you first wrote it?
The short story was a good starting point. There was a very clear tone and cadence to the character, the way he spoke. Eli and I, when we went on to adapt into the script, we started injecting it with aspects of other elements to do with New Zealand's social history. My brother one of my brothers was an influence there in terms of Mandrake in the best possible charming way. But also it was, you've got to get interested in the actor. And when I met Daniel, we spoke the same language. He knew the same references and had the same knowledge as me about the types of films tonally that I was interested in. So once he comes into the room, and I'm following him now. Mandrake, may have looked very different in my mind originally and went through several iterations, but ultimately you've got to invest in the collaborator and who's standing before you. And the great thing with Daniel was that he was willing to put everything on the line, and he was open to exploration and just trying new things and getting back on the horse again and again and again. And that's what I want as a director, is to work with an actor who's willing to just be risky and try and give them as wider space to swing as possible, or as confined a space, being in a car.
Okay. I mean, what were some of the touchstones that you looked at, some of the films that inspired this style?
I think, we shared an interest in a lot of films from America from the 70s, character-driven films, not just road movies. Obviously, something like the original Hitcher with Rutger Hauer is a key touchstone, but more so a lot of films that we both admire from Europe over the years. I got very interested in how The Wetlands, for example, which is 2016. That was a great exploration of a murder mystery on the surface, but underneath it's actually about politics. It's about men. It's about masculinity, and there's also humor in that. I think some of those films. I would say underneath every single film I'm interested in is Blue Velvet, because that just continues to inspire, continues to scar me. So, I think Mandrake and Frank Booth would be good drinking buddies.
It's funny. I mean, it's same for you, Daniel. Were there any other performances or characters that you drew off of as you were kind of crafting this character in your head?
No, so I typically don't look at other people's performances. It never ends well. So I don't really look at other people's performances. I just try and find, a certain frequency in myself, I suppose. But there was definitely literature that James gave me, and I ended up sort of reading sort of case studies and reading a lot about people who are sort of diseased in the mind and on a certain level of psychopathy, So I wanted to love him too, I needed to love him, like to proceed, and that took a little while. I was starting to get worried actually when we were a few weeks out from shooting. Then I sort of found a place where I could love him. I know that sounds kind of esoteric and spooky and actory, but like I did find it, And then once I found that, then I knew that no matter what I did, I'd be okay, because I could pull it back to that place, I also, because I think he's someone with a crusade, but it was tricky for me coming back to New Zealand too, because there's that terror that you have when you're I grew up essentially as a Kiwi, and going to the United States, there's this terror in me that I was going to seem like this inauthentic New Zealander, like sort of a counterfeit Kiwi, because to American ears I sound pretty Kiwi, but to a New Zealander or an Australian, they'll be like, you sound like a fucking Yank, and so I needed to make adjustments, in terms of like, I also just needed to really listen to people colloquially, and so I wasn't sort of pouring it on and making. I didn't want them to be a cartoon, even though the world is rather heightened, Yeah. So it was scary for me, actually going back and feeling like I wouldn't be regarded as a Kiwi in it. I don't know why. But in a weird way, any of his peculiarities in the film kind of work anyway for me now, which is one of the very few things I've ever done that I've rewatched. I don't watch things that I'm in. I don't like it. This is one of the very few where the stories and this tribute to James and the environment he built, you know.
One of the things I really like about the story is that for a long time, we really don't know what his motivation is. It could be, I think, for a while that, you know, we think he's just doing this for sport, or he's just trying in it for the money or whatever. And it slowly kind of, you know, turns out that, yeah, there is more under the surface, and there's more to his victims than we realize. Was that, you know, was that something that drew you to the character, you know, or yeah, or I guess how did you balance that? I guess this is for both of you. You know, how did you balance that in the storytelling?
You go, James.
Yes, I don't see the world in black and white terms. So, you know, I'm interested in that grey space, and the majority of the characters in this film occupy that grey space. Whether they start out seeming as one thing, and you know, you reveal layers to each character as the film goes on. But for me, it's a compelling character is somebody who challenges your beliefs or your views and are flawed. It's a tricky one to answer without sort of giving too much away, but it was very important for me that an audience, they don't walk away with a black and white view. It's not a film that proposes answers or solutions. It's a film that sort of says, and this is where we are at, and that's in all of our hands, and it's not just the problems for a certain group of people over here in society. It's actually something that the long shadow of it casts over all of us. So, you know, it's how I view New Zealand, despite the clean green, you know, veneer on the surface. There is an underbelly there, and until we look at that and really embrace that side of us, we can't really hope for any great healing to happen.
Were there any, you know, specific challenges? It's some moments that were the hardest to film, or yeah, what were some of your biggest challenges in telling the story?
Well, it was a pretty breakneck speed shoot. We shot it over 20 days, well, nights actually, about 16 nights and 4 days. We shot that in the middle of winter in Wellington, and it's you know, it's an exterior film. It takes place out, you know, either inside the confines of a car or in the wide open spaces in and around rural Wellington. So those things I know present certain challenges, but also, you know, they become our greatest assets. I mean, I'll let Daniel speak to that, how it was for the cast, but that those conditions, that sort of pressure, you know, diamonds are made from pressure. It gives a certain focus and a level of energy that comes about, and I think we capture that in the film. And it was and it's definitely the tone. Again, it's a duality in New Zealand. We start in the day and we come through the night. So yeah, I found every single challenge to be my best friend on this production, and I had every single challenge present itself.
Wow.
Great.
Daniel?
Yeah, I mean, you asked specifically what was the hardest thing necessarily to film. I think, you know, it's sort of echoing James a little bit, like every scene was the hardest scene. Like every scene was the hardest. It just felt like we were always cold or challenged. And even when we were in the studio, we were trying to reach, you know, some sort of almost music within the scene that almost felt a little bit impossible because we felt like we were stagnant. And there's always challenges. I agree with James. You know, your greatest allies are cloaked in your greatest problems. You know, but these films are special, and there is a different tone to them. You know, and I think that's why we're so lucky to have like festivals like Sundance that celebrate these movies still in existence, because otherwise it'd just be like this endless tundra of things that don't challenge and that do, as James said, provide us with all these answers and not important questions, you know. And I like feeling the protagonists in hard situations. So as difficult as it was, it all felt like a bit of a gift. But yeah, I mean, it's called Coming Home in the Dark, and it doesn't take great imagination to realize that you're going to be mostly at night in this movie, right? And that's what it was, and the freezing cold. But man, it kind of makes the movie really splendid too. And when on occasion you do see New Zealand, you know, it just unfolds into this just majesty, you know. And I don't think I've ever watched something and appreciated, firstly because it was shot so beautifully, but second of all, yeah, but within the context of the movie, I don't think I've ever enjoyed looking at New Zealand landscapes more, because and yet there is that ominous specter kind of looming over it as well. Like whenever you feel them, you're like, this is a relief, but I can feel the night coming. Even when you're in broad daylight in this film, you can feel the night coming, you know?
Absolutely. All right. Well, thank you both so much for joining me today.
Hey,
Thank you so much.